This is a video about being the main character of your own story. This is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, which is basically trying to be yourself and ask yourself what you want versus what other people want. About this time last year, I was living in Chicago, which is one of the largest cities in the US. And from an outside perspective, I was having a great time. I had a bunch of friends. Almost every night of the week, I could have something to do if I wanted to, and very often I did. I was going to the happy hours, I was going out to great restaurants, but I just felt like there was something missing. That I was living this picture of a life, and I was like a character in it, but someone else had written the story, and I was not the main character. And so, in the fall of last year, I sold a bunch of my stuff, transferred the lease on my apartment to a friend, and I bought a plane ticket to Burlington, Vermont, to go on an adventure in the Northeast. Then things started to change. Well, I just got to Burlington, Vermont, and I scored a RAV4. So far the trip's off to a pretty good start. I kind of messed up and did this whole trip last minute. And because of that, I couldn't actually book a hotel in Burlington, Vermont because it was just way too expensive. It was about $600 a night. Booked an Airbnb way outside the city. And when I got to this Airbnb, there was no Wi-Fi and there was no cell phone reception. And I think that was a really good experience because when you take those things away, and you're really just forced to kind of sit with your thoughts, it definitely makes yourself ask, what do I really want to do? Well, I never knew I was alive. I think sometimes being your own main character means being on your own. Being willing to go out and be by yourself and face down who you are and ask yourself what you really like. So you can understand that your intuition might be telling you to pick up a guitar and play it, or to write something, or to think about a relationship that you might not have processed. And so being alone, I'm coming to realize, is a really important part of being your own main character. That doesn't mean you can't be with other people, but having that space to be yourself on your own, I really do think is important to realizing the character that you want to be. After that night in that Airbnb, the whole trip was kind of like that. Unexpected things kept happening. This is the first day of my trip through the Northeast, first full day. It's starting out to be an interesting one because now I'm driving through Vermont in the country where there's no wireless signal. So I actually don't know exactly where I'm going. Figuring out the exact best way to get back to the highway, which is 89, is my current challenge to overcome. The only clue I had to get back to the highway was that I knew the direction I came from. And I remember going the wrong way a few times. And once again, I just went the wrong way. Ran into a little bit of a dead end. I guess the only other way to go is the other way. And finally I found this truck that seemed like it knew where it was going, and I just started tailing the truck out until we got to the highway. Update, I've made it to the highway and once again have cell phone reception, so know where we're going. Even during that point in time when I just didn't know exactly where I was going and knew at times I was probably going the wrong way, I was still enjoying myself. And I think that's a really good lesson. In life, when you're going through things, even if it's not going right, I do believe that you should still feel you want to be doing the thing that you're doing, even when it's not going 100% according to plan. Whenever you're in a situation and things aren't going the way that you wanted them to, and you're just like, I don't know if this is all worth it, I think that's something that's important to pay attention to. And actually ask yourself, is this really all worth it? Because when you're doing something like I was, driving through the Vermont countryside, even when it's not going according to plan, and you can kind of smile and laugh at it a little bit, you know you are playing a character you want to be playing. You know you're living a story that you want to be living. And if you can smile when things are hard, those are the stories that you definitely want to be in. Another really memorable scene from that trip for me was, I knew I really wanted to do a lot of hiking on this trip, because in Chicago, being outdoors felt like something I was just missing in the city. When I spent time as a wilderness first responder, I grew up camping and hiking, and when I moved to the city, I just kind of lost a lot of that. So I knew I wanted to spend a lot of time outside and do a lot of hiking. One of the hikes that I picked was in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and it was the top rated hike in New Hampshire, and it was the Franconia Ridge Trail. I'll never forget the name. And I remember driving to this trailhead in the morning. I am on my way this morning to go hike the #1 rated hike by all trails in New Hampshire, which is the Franconia Ridge Loop, after having stayed in my first hostel since 2016 and remembering why I haven't stayed in a hostel since then because I didn't get any sleep. Everybody was just snoring so loudly, but I was so excited. All right, this will be the most elevation that I hiked during this road trip, which is also a hiking trip, which is also just an adventure, and I'm looking forward to it. I think we get close to around 5,000 feet. So yeah, here we go. Let the adventure begin. Can I do it? I don't know. We're gonna find out. I just started hiking when I ran into this ranger and he said, are you aware of the conditions at the top? Not great. We're looking at ice, not sure how thick, and single-digit wind chills, which I'm not quite outfitted for. And I decided, you know what? I'm here. I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a shot. My plan here is gonna be go up, see how the conditions are. If I start running into a lot of ice, which it sounds like we might, then I will stop and turn around. I've been hiking up towards ice before in the Smoky Mountains. Basically what happens is you just get to a certain point, you can't get any further, and you gotta turn around. And that hike ended up being way more challenging than I could have ever thought. As I moved up the mountain, I kept having this thought that maybe, as the day goes on, the snow and ice will melt higher up and I won't have to deal with it. Slowly, as I moved higher and higher and higher on the mountain, I started to see snow and I was like, okay, well, there's a little bit of snow, but maybe it won't get much worse than that. It's only a little bit. And then I started to see more snow and then more snow. And then it actually started to get pretty slippery. I remember walking along this trail and just really moving. It just felt really good to feel my body working like that. I just really felt I was doing what I needed to be doing. I was someone who I wanted to be. And I remember continuing to climb this mountain and it got really technical. And I got to this part where I was almost not even sure if I could make it back because I didn't have micro spikes that would allow me to climb through the ice. So I knew I could get up to the summit, but I wasn't entirely sure if I could make it back. And I was definitely pushing my comfort zone. And then I decided to keep going. I was like, there's enough other people up here that if anything happens, they'll see, and there's people who are hiking this who are less prepared than I am, so I'm gonna keep going. And I kept pushing, and as I got higher and higher and higher, I finally got up to the summit. I was really hoping I would get a great view, but it was just what felt like the top of Mount Everest. There was snow, there was ice, there was rocks, there was cloud cover. You couldn't see anything, like being in a different world. But I just remember feeling really happy, even though I was really, really cold, that I had made it and I had pushed my comfort zone. And in that, I felt this boost of confidence. And I feel like that's also a big part of feeling like you are the main character in a story. It's living a story that's worth living, that has obstacles and challenges to overcome. When we think of our favorite films, when we think of our favorite movies or our favorite books, it's never the books and the stories where everything comes easy to the main characters. Imagine how boring it would be if you walked into a movie and the character had a goal, something they really wanted at the start, and everything just came really easily to them. It's probably a movie you wouldn't stay very long for. And I think that's a lot like life too. To feel like you are the main character in a story, you need to feel like you're working for things a little bit. And it's the process of working for things and running into obstacles and being a little bit unsure and deciding to move forward anyway that makes it feel like things are really worth achieving and things are really worth doing. At least that's what I'm starting to find. So then I started to head down this mountain and it was really technical. This was the part I was most concerned about. Moving down a mountain when there's snow and ice, you're just setting yourself up to end up in a slide. I remember I just told myself, I'm going to fall at some point. What this is about now is just minimizing the impact of that fall. And so I kept moving down the mountain and I wasn't falling. I started to build even more confidence, was feeling really, really great. And then I got to the bottom of the mountain and I saw this person fall in front of me while they were walking down this stream. I biffed it. I totally fell. And I slid down this kind of rock face onto the trail again. And I got back up and I remember thinking, wow, that happened. And I really didn't want that to happen, but I was fine. In fact, I don't even think I was bruised. And I got back up and realized that metaphorically, and it might seem kind of cheesy, but it's true that I can fall and get back up and recover from it. And usually falling in anything and having anything not work out isn't as hard as you think it is. Our minds, or at least my mind, is really creative and tends to go in all of the deepest dark places with imagining all the bad things that can happen. But sometimes a fall is just kind of a light fall, and it's something you can pick yourself up from and walk away from. Sometimes it's not, but most of the time I think it is. And what I'm learning is to be okay with falling is a big part of feeling like you're living your own story. If you feel like you have to constantly protect yourself from the environment, you're never really going to expose yourself to the things that are going to make you feel like you're living your own life. You're never really going to put yourself in those situations to go after things that you really want because you're going to be afraid of what happens when you don't get it. So I think learning to understand and doing things that help you recognize that, hey, maybe this thing not working out or failing is not the worst thing in the world is a really good lesson to learn. And that's something that was definitely reinforced in me that day hiking along the Franconia Ridge Trail. And from that point on, I went on to see just some beautiful things. I think New Hampshire is probably one of the most beautiful states I've ever been to. Just walked out on some incredible lookouts. And then I went to Maine. All this time I was doing this traveling, I was in the evenings going back to the Airbnb that I had rented or the hotel that I had booked, and I was playing guitar. And I really just started to feel like I was in touch with myself again because I was doing stuff that I loved. I really think when we become disconnected from ourselves, when we start to feel like we're not the main character in our own lives, it's because we're not doing things that we want to be doing. And a really easy way to just start feeling like you are the person you want to be, living the life that you want to be living, is to start doing some of the things that you want to start doing. And you don't have to really take a trip like I did to do that. I think you can start doing that living where you're living. You just have to prioritize it and protect your time. And going away does make it easier because you don't have the distractions of what you might have back home. You don't have the schedule and the routine to keep you locked into the story that you've been living. But it's not absolutely necessary. You can go out and start doing some things that you really care about today. And in doing that, I think you will take actionable steps towards feeling like you are the main character in your own story. At least that's what I started to realize on this trip. A big part of this trip for me was asking the question, do I want to live in a big city? Do I want to live in Chicago? I didn't have an apartment in Chicago when I was traveling in the Northeast. And I thought that what I might want to do is just keep traveling. Like, I had a remote job, it would allow me to do that. But what I started to realize on that trip was that I really enjoyed being on my own. It was really important for me to continue doing what I love, but people are also really important, and your relationships are also really important. I realized that the long-term solution for me wasn't just to isolate myself. It was to figure out a way to balance being in relationships with other people and having friends and doing some of the fun Chicago things while also prioritizing the things that are important in my life. What I reminded myself on that trip was important to me was being creative, was filming, was playing guitar, was getting outside and prioritizing all those things as much as going out and hanging out with friends. It took me a trip to realize that. But once I realized that, I feel like I have now been able to take some of the lessons that I learned from being on that adventure and come back to Chicago and feel a little bit more like I'm a player in my own story. In a lot of the best stories, the main character ends up back where they started, but they end up back where they started a little bit changed and with a new perspective. And that was definitely true for me. That's how I figured out how to reposition myself as the main character in my life. And I think with enough reflection and enough thought, you can too. And if you are someone who's really looking to become the main character in your own life, then I have a book recommendation for you. And the book recommendation is A Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. In this book, Joseph Campbell lays out what he calls the hero's journey, which is this journey that the main character in almost every story that's ever been written goes through. From a call to adventure, the different trials they experience, the rewards they experience, the setbacks they experience, and finally, the obstacles they overcome to achieve the goal that they wanted. And reading this book helped me see myself as the main character in a story and provide meaning to some of those obstacles that I was running into along the way. It's really amazing how your view of obstacles change once you start to see them as a really important part of your story, as something that is making the whole thing work. This book has been a really good companion for me as I've gone through my life and I've lived out multiple story arcs. And that's the thing about being your own main character. In the movies, you just see one clip of people's lives. And our lives are not made up of just one story, but many stories. And we all have many heroes' journeys we go through. What I've found is a big part of feeling like I'm a main character in my life is recognizing the journey that I'm on. This book by Joseph Campbell has really helped me understand the things I'm working towards and place meaning behind that. So if you're interested in the book, I've put a link in the description below. You can go ahead and find it there. Otherwise, good luck with your own adventures and your own story and being your own main character. And I hope that you become the main character you can be proud of, as I am working to be. That's all for this time. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you later.